"There's a special prisoner in the jail." He just looked up. The guards on the wall put away their weapons. The inmates all rushed to the door and waited. Even the warden had to dress up to welcome him in person. All these unusual behavior because he was a legendary general, Eugene Alvin. Eugene was highly regarded in the army. His books were in the warden's personal collection, and now he's made a mistake in command, which resulted in the death of a whole squad of soldiers. He was court-martialed. He's facing 10 years in prison, but that didn't dampen the warden's enthusiasm. He gave Eugene a private audience. Not only did he show Eugene his collection, he went out and found the book, in hopes of getting Eugene's autograph. But when he returned to his office, he heard Eugene say to his adjutant,
"Any man with a collection like this is a man who's never set foot on a battlefield. To him, a mini ball from Shiloh is just an artifact. Combat vet is a hunk of metal that caused some poor bastard pain."
The warden's face changed. The reverence in his heart dissipated. He had never been to war as a soldier. Eugene's words pierced his heart. He had Eugene taken back to his cell, and no one was allowed to salute Eugene, because he was the only officer here. The others were just prisoners without rank. The warden was furious. He was going to make sure that the prisoners knew who was in charge here. So the next day, during free time, he ordered his men to give the inmates only one basketball. This triggered a confrontation between the inmates. The guards around him did nothing in the face of the commotion, until someone pulled out a weapon. The warden, who was secretly watching, sounded the alarm. At the sound of the alarm, everyone panicked and got down on the floor. The only one who didn't react was the prisoner with the weapon. Eugene didn't know what was going on, but he did what he was told. While he was confused, the guards on the guard tower opened fire. The rubber bullets didn't kill him, but the pain didn't diminish. Eugene watched the reactions of those around him. It's clear this isn't the first time this has happened. The warden saw these officers, who had once stood above the rest, were now lying in fear at their feet. The satisfaction was immense. By the time lunch was over, several prisoners approached Eugene, hoping that he could use some of his connections to replace the sinister warden. Eugene didn't want any trouble. He just wanted to spend the next 10 years here in peace, and then go home to his old age. But he didn't know. What he didn't mean to say that night was the reason the warden was targeting him. Trouble would come to him, and he couldn't hide from it. One day during free period, a prisoner saw Eugene. He was so excited, he saluted. He introduced himself as a former Marine. He was incarcerated for 6 years for a single assault. As the young soldier's heart grew sadder and sadder, Eugene comforted him graciously, while correcting his salute. This heartwarming scene was witnessed by the warden upstairs. He was jealous of Eugene's reputation in the army, even as a prisoner. He's been courted by others, and he, as warden, he was in charge of the lives of the prisoners, but he had never been treated with such respect. Then he ordered the prisoner to be severely punished. He made him salute all night in the rain, and he didn't stop until the next day. Eugene stepped forward to stop him. He took the guard's arm and raised it. Suddenly the whistle blew. The other guards seemed to be prepared. They came at Eugene with their batons and beat him until he spat blood. Then the warden rushes in, explaining to Eugene in a braggadocio manner that if you're in prison, you have to follow the rules. All physical contact with a guard here is considered assault. Even a highly respected general like Eugene will be punished by the prison. The warden punished him for assaulting a guard, lifting hundreds of kilograms of debris with his bare hands in the hot sun. The warden was expecting Eugene to make a fool of himself in his old age, but he underestimated the strength of a veteran, and the inmates' initial scorn and disdain, as Eugene continued to move, turned to cheering. When the last stone was thrown, the scene was filled with thunderous cheers. Eugene, by himself. Eugene defended his dignity as a soldier. This act conquered all the convicts, but the warden saw their revelry as a blinding spectacle. To the warden's eyes, he immediately ordered an extension of the punishment, for Eugene to bring the stone back the way it came. Hearing that the warden was making things difficult, the inmates came forward to fight, but Eugene said nothing. He just went to work, even though he was exhausted, and tripped and fell and broke his head. He didn't stop, and when the sun went down, the guards blew their horns to stop him. Eugene beat the warden to the punch. The warden demanded that he be kept in solitary confinement. When Eugene returned to his cell block, the inmates were banging their name tags on the bars, as a token of their highest esteem. Before Eugene knew it, that he had inadvertently become the spiritual leader of the inmates. The next day he came out to the yard. There was a stone wall built by the inmates. They thought it was pointless. It was just a way for the warden to torture them. But Eugene found it. That some of the prisoners' names and identities were carved into the stone. He thought it wasn't just a wall of stone. It was a fortress built by former inmates for themselves. A few words of chicken soup inspired the prisoners. They worked together to knock down the crude wall. They were going to build their own trench from scratch. But although they were all soldiers, they were no experts at building walls. So Eugene recommended Aggie as a counselor, because his father was a mason. Under Aggie's guidance, the prisoners improved rapidly, and they were able to build the wall faster. For days, they worked together. The relationship between the 4 inmates has eased. Now they are one. They were all striving for the same goal. Soon, a solid and perfect stone wall stood in the center of the playground. A prisoner who used to look down on a Jew answered the call, inviting him to be the first to carve his name. It was their way of recognizing Aggie. However, this symbol of unity was seen by the warden, to the warden as a challenge to his authority. He brought in a bulldozer to destroy the wall. A Jew immediately ran over to the car and stood alone in front of it. He would not allow his work to be trampled on. The alarm went off. Neither the guard's shouts nor his cellmates' cries could shake a Jew's resolve. This is his battlefield. revolt. As a soldier, he would never back down. But to the warden, it was like adding fuel to the fire. He ordered a Jew to be shot. A rubber bullet pierced his skull. The young soldier died in prison. It was a scene that hurt Eugene deeply. He lay awake at night. The next morning, he gathered all the prisoners in front of the collapsed stone wall and sang a military song to honor Aggie's memory with a special prison salute. At that moment, the prisoners finally remembered that they were supposed to be warriors and not just cattle or horses to be slaughtered. A prison army was formed, facing a tyrannical and arrogant warden. Eugene was about to exact his revenge. The warden lost his nerve in the face of the old, beloved general, so he decided to take the first step. He went to his boss, General Baldhead, and told him. He said Eugene had lost his mind. He said that Eugene had lost his mind and was organizing a prison riot. He didn't know that Eugene was General Baldhead's leader. Even the star on his shoulder was given to him by Eugene himself. General Baldhead didn't believe it. He decided to meet with Eugene and ask him about it. And this was actually part of Eugene's plan. When they met, they got straight to the point. Eugene asked Baldhead to remove the warden from his post. But all Baldhead cares about is getting his old leader out safely. Meanwhile, the warden picks up a letter. It says the riot will start at 12:10, and it's signed by Eugene. The warden sends out the entire police force. First, they stormed the parlor and took Baldhead away. They're gonna use water cannons to silence all the prisoners outside. Helicopters circled overhead to deal with the situation. But when the time came, nothing happened. The warden realized he'd been tricked. The letter was just a decoy. It was meant to force the warden's hand. Now that the inmates are aware of the prison's strength and equipment, and now they're going to start a real riot. The next day at lunch, two inmates deliberately clashed. They distracted the guards in the cafeteria. Eugene took the opportunity to make his plan public. He read the U.S. Code of Military Justice. The most important part of removing the warden was to make him lose control of the prison. So the inmates would take the guard towers and the airplanes. And finally, they're gonna fly the flag upside down. This means the prison has been compromised. As long as we can hold out until General Baldhead arrives, the warden's faults will not be covered up. The inmates were thrilled to hear it, except for one. Sure enough, John found the warden and told him all about Eugene's plan. It turns out that John had been paid off by the warden. John had been paid off by the warden. He'd become a mole among the prisoners. No sooner had John finished speaking than there were insults coming from outside the door. One of the inmates passed by and overheard the conversation. The warden had him put in solitary confinement. He was to have no contact with anyone. John was in a cold sweat, so he was ready to leave. He would report back tomorrow with further information. The next day, John went to the warden as promised. He told him that Eugene was going to fly the flag upside down, but the warden scoffed because the flag was in his office. He couldn't have gotten it anywhere else. He went over and opened the box, but it's empty. The truth is, John didn't defect. Yesterday's scene was part of the plan. The prisoners were shouting to attract attention so that John could take the flag from here. The warden was furious, sent the guards out to the yard to round up all the inmates. Then they went from cell to cell, but the inmates did the same thing at the same time. They were the first to block the cell doors. They trapped the guards inside. Then they spread out and methodically took control of the rest of the prison. They entered the cafeteria. They took out all the plates and used them as shields. Someone posing as the warden reported to General Baldhead that there was a riot in the prison. The inmates started a full-scale counterattack. The warden had to send in a helicopter. Eugene's been waiting for this. They shoved the hooks into the blisters. Then they reopened the valve. The hooks are hooked to the helicopter. John, the ex-pilot, quickly climbed up and took over control of the helicopter, and that was the last step in the riot. All the inmates lined up to fly the flag upside down. The warden had one more card to play. Special forces suddenly appeared all around, with live rounds aimed at the crowd. The prisoners had to get down and surrender. Eugene was the only one who carried the flag to the flag-raising platform. The warden, enraged, ordered his troops to fire, but no one listened to him. They weren't dealing with prisoners. They were dealing with a highly respected hero. So the warden took out his own gun and fired. Eugene fell hard, and with his last strength, he raised the flag to the top. But it wasn't until then that everyone realized the flag wasn't upside down. As a general, Eugene would never do that. The crowd salutes. Eugene showed the love and loyalty of a soldier with his life. He gave his life to protect the dignity of all the prisoners.